the Using ZeroShell in the Lab webinar. So we're going to be talking about how to use this open source distribution of Linux, or at least this distribution of Linux, to implement some lab scenarios that could be helpful to you in your studies for CWNP certifications, but also beneficial to you to just get the experience with working with the different technologies. So we're going to get right in as quickly as we can here. First of all, a quick overview for those of you that might not be familiar with what CWNP does. We offer career certifications in enterprise Wi-Fi technologies. So our organization is focused on helping you learn the knowledge and the skill sets that you need in order to administer wireless LANs, that's CWNA, in order to secure wireless LANs, that's CWSP, in order to design wireless LANs and implement them, that's CWDP, and in order to troubleshoot wireless LANs, that's CWAP. So we have these that are exam-based certifications. That is, each one of them requires passing one exam to get that specific certification, though CWSP, CWDP, and CWAP require that you already have your CWNA. Now, there's another certification not listed here. That's the CWTS certification. And that particular certification is for those that are sales professionals, entry-level technologists, people that work at the help desk, people who, for example, maybe work for a internet provider and they go out and they install cable for someone like Time Warner or something like that. And all they really have to do is set up that Wi-Fi device so that it'll work for that customer. And in many cases, they just let them configure themselves automatically. But in other cases, they may actually take the time to set it up on a good channel. Wouldn't that be nice? So CWTS is helpful for that when those types of installers may go out as well. The final one here is CWNE, that's the Certified Wireless Network Expert. And this is basically an individual who has passed all four of the other shown exams here. And they have 3 years minimum experience in enterprise Wi-Fi technology. And that works by submitting an application to the CWNE Board of Advisors. There are 6 board members plus myself on that board. And this is the process then. So they submit an application, they submit essays based on work experience, and they get 3 endorsers to endorse them, both that they know Wi-Fi and have a good work ethic and so forth. And they also submit for some publication requirements. The details are all on the CWNE page at the website, but it's basically one that validates you as a true expert in wireless LAN knowledge areas. Okay, so that's the information about who we are. Quick agenda today. First of all, we'll talk about why you would build a lab in the first place, whether it's with ZeroShell or something else, and what the benefits are of having your own lab. Then we'll talk a little bit about ZeroShell as an overview, and then we'll look in more detail what are the benefits of ZeroShell, meaning what does it offer, what is in this Linux distribution. And then we'll have a brief ZeroShell walkthrough. Hopefully, if everything works right, we'll have a ZeroShell walkthrough and let you see what it looks like in the actual use of this system. And of course, also want to make sure that you're aware the CWNP annual conference in the US is coming up here September 24th through the 26th next month in San Francisco. A great opportunity. I tell you, I was just looking at the agenda for this conference this morning and had a meeting and mentioned to someone, you know, this list of speakers and topics that they're talking about, this has to be one of the best wireless LAN conference agendas that I've ever seen. So if you haven't had a chance, go to the URL cwnp.com/2015 National Conference. There's a link there that says agenda. You can go in and see just what people are going to be talking about. Whether you're already scheduled to attend or just curious, take a look at that. I think you'll agree the lineup is just phenomenal, both with who's speaking and what they're talking about. Some really good, important technical deep dives that are going to be very, very important to you. And I do notice a couple of people are saying they're not hearing anything. So if those of you who can hear can just verify to me that you are, and that will tell me that it's probably something on their side, and I can just continue and hopefully they'll be able to work that out. Okay, so that's our agenda, and here we go. So first of all, why build a lab in the first place? So, you know, the big question is always, why would I spend the time to build a lab? Why wouldn't I just read books? And when I read the books, I then have the knowledge to be able to pass the exam. Well, the reason is because you don't just want to pass exams, you want to actually really know this information. And first of all, our professional level exams are much more difficult to pass if all you do is read. And so getting hands-on experience is key. So gaining experience is very important. Having actually done the tasks is essential. And then it also helps you to fully understand the concepts. I'm sure you've experienced this before. You've read about a technology and how it works, and then you actually implement said technology. That is, you actually install it and configure it and get it working. And what happens in that process is you really understand it. It clicks for you. It's kind of like the difference between reading about IP subnetting and actually doing IP subnetting to build a network, right? So the doing really gives you understanding of the concepts at a very, very different level. For example, I can read about how to repair a car, but there are certain things you only gain through experience. Like most of the books that might tell you how to repair a car don't tell you what to do when you've got a bolt that's not loosening, and how do you go about loosening that without breaking it if possible. And what if you do break it off? How do you get the old bolt out so you can put a new bolt in? Okay, so the books tell you how to do it when it works right? When you build a lab and things don't work right and you've got to figure it out and you've got to fix it, then you learn those extra things. So it helps you fully understand the concepts. And the other thing that I have always found is that you retain information much better when you actually do this instead of just reading about it or thinking about it. So these are just my big suggestions about why you should build a lab. And just as we continue, any of you who might actually have other additional advice and opinions about why build a lab, feel free to share in the chat box, and others can look at your ideas and why you think people should build their own lab as well as we go through this. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and talk to you a little bit about a ZeroShell overview. So when it comes to the ZeroShell overview, the key thing that we need to understand here is that it is a Linux distribution. And I'm going to type something in here for just one moment for those that are having a hard time hearing. Okay, so it is a Linux distribution. If you're familiar with that, you know that there's a Linux kernel, right? This is the core of the operating system. And then on top of that kernel, there are all kinds of different distros that are out there for specific reasons. For example, one of my absolute favorites that anyone who's watched any webinars with me will have noticed me mention it probably 1 out of every 3 webinars, is Kali Linux, which is a pen tester's distribution of Linux, but it actually contains an awful lot of great stuff for Wi-Fi folks, whether you're using it just for pen testing or for analysis and troubleshooting or whatever. So that's an interesting distro. And then ZeroShell is another Linux distribution, which is created mostly by an individual, but it really gives you a lot of power. And it's less than a 250 megabyte download. I think the most recent version is like 199 megabytes. Before that, it was a little bigger and then it got smaller. But that's just the core distribution. There are packages you can add on to it, which will increase its overall size, but that's the core distribution. And what you actually download is a live disk, a live CD that you can boot and run just live. So if you just want to boot it up and fully configure it every time, then you can use the live distro. But if you want to boot it up and have it save your configurations, well, then you're going to want to run it in a virtual machine. I'm running it in VMware Workstation today, but it'll run in VirtualBox, Oracle's VMware solution. It'll run in Hyper-V. So, there are a lot of options, but it'll run well in a VM. But basically, it builds a full-featured authentication and security appliance. So basically, what this is going to give you is a single install, a virtual machine or a live boot that will allow you to do an awful lot of security-related configuration elements for your lab. And the benefit is it is free. You don't have to pay for it. Now, if you want the extra packages, the gentleman who built this has been very kind. There are a couple of ways you can get the packages. One is you can give a donation of any size through PayPal just to help him continue building it. So, $5 or something, and maybe more if you really love it, and you get a code that lets you get into the package repository is what it amounts to. Or you can just put a link to his website on your website, or you can post in a forum somewhere on the internet and say, hey, I found this really cool product called ZeroShell, and then let him know that you did that, and he'll give it to you for free. So either spread the news about ZeroShell or give him a donation, and you can get your code. And then once you do that, for example, you can add on Nmap, and then you can use your ZeroShell VM as a network scanner, as well as all the rest of the things that it does. So it's a really interesting distribution, and definitely something worth looking into for yourself, for your labs, and CWSP, CWDP, certainly both of those, even CWAP, because part of CWAP is troubleshooting, right? Well, you want to be able to troubleshoot a radius authentication that's not working. So you can set up ZeroShell, and you can intentionally maybe break some things and see what errors you get on your wireless client, what kind of things happen, and begin to get familiar with what happens when things are wrong in an authentication infrastructure for troubleshooting with CWAP and things like that. So there are a lot of possible uses of ZeroShell in your lab. So let's talk about then the benefits of ZeroShell. What does it actually include? I've already mentioned some of them. First of all, ZeroShell has built-in radius server. It's based on free radius, if you're familiar with that. And if you've ever configured free radius on Linux, it's not the easiest thing in the world to get up and running. But the beauty of ZeroShell is it's already configured and up and running in this distribution. And then you just have to go in and enable or disable different things you might want on the radius server. So it's part of it, and that means that you can have a radius server that in this case supports EAP TLS, EAP TTLS, and I believe PEEP is the other one that it supports. So these are EAP types that are built in, and you can use it therefore for configuring a radius installation and going through that process. It has a VPN server. And as you can imagine, in a wireless environment, oftentimes we tell people, well, if you're at a hotspot, get a VPN connection back to corporate headquarters and then use the internet through that or something of that sort. Well, you can set up a VPN server so you can get IPsec VPN connections through this. It has a built-in captive portal. And this is very useful, both for the CWSP and CWDP, going through this process of setting up a captive portal, understanding the design decisions you have to make when building a captive portal and so forth. So all of that is there. You can customize the captive portal through the GUI interface to some extent, and then you can even go low level if you want and fully customize the files behind the captive portal. It has a built-in DNS server, DHCP server, and quality of service settings, so you can literally use it to build your own complete little network. And it has even a load balancer, so you can build network load balancing into it. There's a firewall, a proxy server, and then in addition to all that, that's just what's in the core. So when you get ZeroShell, you download the 200 roughly megabyte distro live CD. If you boot up that live CD, you can use all the things that are listed here. If you install it in a VM but don't add any packages, you can do all the things that are listed here. If you want extra features, like I mentioned Nmap, then that's where you get your add-on packages in order to get those extra features. Now, any bug fixes are able to be installed without actually having to get that package code. So you do need to get access to the package repository for the extra add-ons, but you do not need to get access to that in order to do bug fixes. That's just included with the download, and you don't have to worry about that in that case. So as you can see, there are actually quite a lot of things that ZeroShell can play as far as a role in your lab. And what's its footprint? Well, I mean, if you wanted to, there's no question. You could actually go back and get some old computer you've got in your garage or your attic that you haven't used for about 13 years, and you can set up ZeroShell on it and use it, and it'll probably work just fine. It doesn't have really high demands. A lot of people run it with 512 megabytes of RAM and an old Celeron processor or something like that. It really is capable of running on low speed processors and really kind of like an appliance mode, if you will. So 512 to a gig of RAM and 500 or 600 to 1 gigahertz processor speeds. Those kinds of things are fine with it. And then as far as hard drive space, even with several add-ons, you could get by with less than a 512 megabyte hard drive. So certainly it's capable of doing a lot, and it doesn't have to have a super powerful computer. And for that reason, you could even run it as a simple virtual machine in the background on your desktop, and you'd hardly even notice that it's there. For many of our desktops anyway. Of course, I'm thinking about my desktop that I'm sitting at right now, which has 32 gigabytes of RAM, i7 processor with 6 cores and all the rest. So yeah, maybe I don't think of desktops like normal people think of desktops. But anyway. Now, ZeroShell walkthrough then. Here's what we'll look at. We'll just get a brief overview of it today because there's so much you could explore in ZeroShell that, in a webinar like this, it's probably not a good setting to actually even contemplate using every feature. But I want you to understand how we access it. So we'll talk about that and take a look at what's running here on my system. Then we'll look at using the shell, and that's the console You can actually telnet or SSH into it, and then using the web interface. So there are a couple of ways that you can interact with it. Full power is going to come, at least at first, through the web interface, and so forth. So this is the thing you're going to do. If it's installed on hard metal, will it act as the network's router? That is absolutely the case, yes. So it will do routing, and you'll see that when we get into the GUI interface. Configuring the router is part of the process of setting it all up. Okay, let's go ahead then and share my desktop so I can show you this. Okay, so what we're looking at here at this moment is the VMware virtual machine. And this virtual machine, by the way, if you have a hard time seeing it, you can maximize your screen so that you go full screen. There's a little icon with 2 arrows pointing to the upper right and the lower left corner up there. If you click that, that'll maximize your screen. And then you should be able to see a little bit better what's actually running here. So this is my actual virtual machine that's running it here, and I am running in VMware Workstation. And as you can see, pretty simple, straightforward interface here for the shell. Now, the key is, I said I'll tell you how to access it. Well, this is one way to access it right here within the shell interface. And the mouse that I'm using is the local mouse. There's no mouse in this because it's a shell interface. By shell interface, if you're not really familiar with it, maybe you've used a lot of GUIs, we're talking about, DOS. We're talking the 1990s, right? Okay, so this is still in here. There's still a shell interface, and that's because Linux is heavily shell-oriented for Linux users, and so this is there. And as you can see, I can use the installation manager here, A. So that's what I would use if I had booted this off of a live CD, which I did not in this case. But I would use that in order to install it to the local virtual drive in the virtual machine, which I've already done, and so this is running locally for me. There's a profile manager because you can actually boot it up and you can have different profiles. So notice here it says default profile. So I can have different profiles, which is really cool for a lab scenario especially, because those different profiles can each be configured differently. So it will retain the different configuration that you've made while booted into a specific profile. So that's a really nice feature of it, and you can use the profile manager for that. You can go to a shell prompt, and then you've just got direct command interface to the Linux system. Of course, you can reboot or shut down. There are a few utilities built in. There's a Wi-Fi manager. Now, this is an interesting one to consider because with it, you can actually use your system as an access point. So ZeroShell can be an access point. You simply have to add an adapter that Linux recognizes as a wireless adapter. And once you've done that, then you can go into the Wi-Fi manager and set it up, and you can actually turn your ZeroShell into a very powerful access point, an access point that has a radius server built in, an access point that has a captive portal built in, all the rest. So that's a really interesting feature to play around with there. I haven't used it a lot in the lab just because it's really more for playing around with from the perspective of setting up a real lab where you have real APs and things like that, but it's definitely an intriguing option. And if you didn't have real APs, you could actually have one virtual machine with a USB supported Wi-Fi adapter plugged in, running ZeroShell as an AP, and another virtual machine running ZeroShell as your radius server, and all literally within one computer, you can set up an AP, a radius server, a captive portal, get it all running within one computer so that you can actually see what's going on there. So that's actually really cool to be able to do that. Now, the other thing you can do here is you can change the admin password, obviously, which is just always tells you right here what it is. User's admin password is ZeroShell. You can show the routing table in relation to the question about routing. You can show firewall rules. You can look at the network interface, go into fail-safe mode, and then there's the IP manager. So that's the thing I want to talk to you about accessing it. So this is one way to access it. The other is through the web interface. And you need to go into the IP manager. So I've clicked into my virtual machine now, and I'll just hit I. And as you can see, it brings me into this mode where I can manage my IP addresses and all of that. I can bring an interface up or down. But the key is, notice up at the top where it tells me for Ethernet 0, my IP address is 192.168.10.149. That's what I need to know, because that's what's going to get me into the interface through the web browser, okay? So that's all I need to know from here. It's just the .149 address, so I can hit Q to go back out. And I really don't need to access this virtual machine again. I'm really done with that. Don't have to access it at all. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and bring up Chrome, because Microsoft Edge has had some problems. Every time I go to ZeroShell, it wants to back out on me and not work. So I'm gonna go here to HTTP 192.168.10.149. And as you can see, it's taking me to the Captive Portal web login. Now, the reason this is bringing me here is because I have the Captive Portal enabled within ZeroShell. So I need to log on here as the administrator. And when I do that and click Network Access, it gives me this that you might be familiar with from hotels. So you can already see this is working like a Captive Portal. And notice that you can also see a feature here. You can track your time, your traffic, and costs. So if you're charging some kind of a fee for access, it tracks that as well. But basically, here in the background now, I can go ahead and log into the actual ZeroShell now that I have logged into the Captive Portal. So if you don't have the Captive Portal enabled, in other words, the first time you start up ZeroShell, you're going to go into it and you're not going to see the Captive Portal logon. You're just going to see the ZeroShell login. The reason I saw the Captive Portal logon is because I've gone here to Captive Portal and I've checked this checkbox right here that says activate the Captive Portal. Okay. So since I did that, I'm actually seeing the portal whenever I come into the IP address of the server. And then, as you can see, let's kind of back up here. If we go back to setup and kind of give you a tour of the interface, and we'll get a walkthrough of the GUI and just see what you can do with this so that you'll be prepared to really think about how you might use this in your lab environments. Now, first of all, you'll notice right here on the main page, this is where you start, the setup page, we have the package manager. And what you can see here in the package manager is there are bug fixes. So there was a bug fix released on March 16, 2015. And to install one, you just literally check it and click manage. And it's going to come up and you can go ahead and install it if you want to. You click on install and apply. And if it needs to be installed, it'll be installed. If it doesn't need to be installed, it might tell you it's already fixed. This case, it says, you know, there's already a bug fix installed that's newer and takes care of this. So I don't need it on mine. But the point is that it's as simple as that. Adding packages is the same way. So let's say, for example, you want to make this, look at that. There's a package to make it a voice over IP PBX. So it can also do that if you want to do some voice over IP analysis from within an environment. But if you go into that and click manage, you're going to see that it says the configuration files are available. So we click on apply to install and watch what happens. It comes back and says, you can't do it without a valid repository subscription. So that's what I was talking about. You can pay him a small fee, or you can just spread the word about it and then email him and let him know, and he'll send you a code so that you can activate that. And that's up here, the subscription button. You click on that button in order to actually configure that code and make it so you can install these. But as you can see, you can do enhanced wireless support. So if you did want to play with it being a wireless AP, you could do that. You can go in and set up Nmap, as I mentioned. You can set up a more powerful web cache proxy, Squid. I don't know if you're familiar with that. We've got Dan's Guardian content filtering. I mean, all this stuff, it's pretty amazing what you can do with it. And if you go into packages, then of course it's just going to show you the rest of the information that's there. You've got your profiles. This is what I mentioned earlier, the default profile. You can create other profiles so that you can make those active and utilize those. You can go into your network, and this is where you see you can configure your different networks. So if in the VM that you're running it in, you add additional Ethernet devices, then you can do routing. You can do different things like that, even within a VM. And you can go into your time server, set up time. The web is going to tell you the web interface that's running and what port it's on. So you can change that if you want to. If you don't want it to be on port 80, you can change it. You can set up the certificate that you want to use for the server. By default, it uses a self-signed certificate. And so all of that can be configured. And then you've got your SSH settings, and you've got your scripts and cron jobs. So if you want to schedule some things to happen, things like that, you can do that too. So as you can see, there's quite a lot. And then even when you get to just the network, look at this. You can configure the gateway, NAT, dynamic DNS, set up a new VPN or bridge, a bonding of channels, PPP over Ethernet, and a 3G modem. So all of this built right into this tool set right out of the box. And all we're looking at right now is just really low-level stuff, right? The things it can do at the networking level. There's some nice utilities in it. You can do ARP, ping, and trace path checks. Under monitoring, you can see what's going on in the environment and look at your event viewer logs and all of that kind of thing, and you can configure alerts. You can configure users and groups. You've got LDAP connections, so notice you can connect to an Active Directory domain. So maybe in your lab, you've already got an Active Directory domain set up. You can synchronize to that AD domain with this, everything built in the GUI, making it nice and easy. And then you have your Radius server. So this is where you can configure your Radius server. And when you configure it, you've got the option, of course, to set up the certificate for the Radius server as well. As you know, you need that for many of your EAP types. And then you can manage the Radius server. You can see your accounting, any authorized clients that are out, which would be your APs, right? Those are your authorized clients, and proxy domains for Radius proxy. Then you've got your accounting related to Radius, and again, your captive portal, which, as you can see right here, I've already got an admin that has logged on through the captive portal. It's actually showing me that he has logged on, and I could disconnect him or do anything I might want to do to him. And for the gateway, I've got many different features included, like, for example, the ability to set up denial of service protection, client identity, have simultaneous connections. Can people connect from multiple devices, in other words? And how long is the authenticator valid? Is it a pop-up? What is it exactly that's going to work there? And so all of that is available in the captive portal. And then, of course, down here you can see you've got hosts and router settings, DNS, DHCP, VPN, quality of service, net balancer, firewall, HTTP proxy, your X.509 certificate authority, Kerberos 5, all this is built in, okay? So let's just briefly take a look then. We'll set up a user here. And so I'll come in. I've already got one user created. I'll go ahead and create a new user. So I click on add a user here, maybe one for me. And we'll just put him in the nobody group since that's the only group I have right now. And his first name will be Tom, last name Carpenter. And we'll go ahead and put in an email. Okay, so then we can set an expiration date. When does this account actually expire? Maybe we're only going to let it work until January 1, 2016. We could set up limits, add credits, and so forth, and set up cost limits for this particular user if we wanted to, or if we were using that feature. Right here, we need to set the password. And then we could, right here, specify a radius VLAN to put this user in. So that's a feature that's built right into the tool that we could configure. So we'll click on Submit. And it creates the user. Pretty straightforward. And notice what it did as well is not only did it create the user, but it created that user's certificate. And this is obviously key if you're wanting to work with different EAP types and see how they work. So right here, I could export the certificate. Notice I can do a PEM, a DER, or a PKCS12. Any of those will work with Windows clients, right? So I can click export, and it downloads that file to my local machine. And so then we can actually go in and see the file. Here it is. Double click it, and you can go ahead and import the certificate if you wanted to. I'm just going to click cancel in this case. But the point is that you can do that at any time, by the way, not just now that I've created the user, but at any time I can pull that certificate out. So if I go back to my users and I go into Tom, then you can see when I go to X509, right there's this certificate. So it's still there waiting on me. Anytime I need to export it, I can come back in and export that. I can regenerate one if I need to. I can renew one. I can revoke one. I can play around with all those different things that you might want to do. And when you go down here to the certificate authority, by the way, notice that right here you can see the expiration date for a certificate. You can also see if you go into a particular user that you have the option to click that user, and then if you revoke it, let's go back, you would see it on the CRL, the certificate revocation list. So all of this is built right into this tool, and that's really the main thing I want to focus on for you today, because we're talking about how to simply get a lab up and running, how to build a lab without having to buy a whole lot of hardware or software, and this interface can really give you a lot of what you need right out of the box. Well, now that we've done that, let's go ahead and close this down, and we'll go ahead and disconnect the current user. And let's go right back in again. And this time, let's log on as Tom. And we'll click Network Access. And now you can see I'm logged on as Tom here. Now, if I try to log in over here as Tom, just so I want you to see this interface and what looks different about it. Notice that what it's seeing is I'm not an admin. So it's not actually taking me into the admin interface. It's taking me into the interface where I can export my certificate if I need to. So right here in a web browser, I can export my certificate on a wired computer, for example, so that I can then go to a wireless computer where I import the certificate and go ahead and gain access to the wireless LAN using an EAP type or something like that. So as you can see, I can change my password, I can view my certificate, export it. That's really all I can do here because I'm just Tom, I'm not admin. Now I could have given Tom admin access when I created his user account, but I didn't, and so Tom gets this interface instead. Okay, so that gives you kind of an overview of ZeroShell and what it's capable of doing for you if you've not seen the tool before. And I think you'll find that this tool, which is again a live distribution, is just a great way to build an environment. So can you limit the captive portal to one VLAN? You can, and you're just going to really do that in your configuration settings. It's an option in there for you to set that up, and you can do that. So that way when they authenticate through the captive portal, they're automatically put on a VLAN, and therefore, of course, you can control what they can access in the environment and so forth. Using it in the lab myself, it's been pretty straightforward to set up. I've only been running with it for about 4 months now, but in the lab environment, I haven't had any real major problems yet. In fact, I've got a virtual machine that's running it that has been up and running for over 2 months at this time, and it just keeps on kicking and works just fine. Okay. So at this point, what I like to do is open up to questions, and while you're thinking about any questions you might have, which I'm watching both the chat interface and the Q&A interface, so you can use either one of those that you'd like to talk with me on, and I'll make sure that I respond to you. And while you're thinking about any questions you might have, let me just remind you that the conference is coming up here next month, September 24th through the 26th, but an additional piece of information is there are 2 classes that are sure to run now. CWDP and CWSP classes will run on September the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd before the conference starts. And so if you want to get CWDP or CWSP training, this will be done by Robert Bartz. He's doing it there in the same area. So you can contact him by emailing Robert at 802.com. That's EIGHTOTWO, 802.com. And you can actually then see exactly what this is about. So good pricing. And by the way, it actually includes the conference. So I don't know if you see that price there, but if you know the price normally for attending some of these professional level classes, then you know that's a pretty good deal because you get not only the classes, but you also get the conference, which means 6 entire days of training, really Monday through Saturday of training and conference material and all the rest that you're going to get. So really a phenomenal deal there for someone that might be wanting to get away for a week and get some training. So again, you can contact Robert Bartz about that. Now let's go ahead and deal with the questions that you might have. Thanks for that comment about Robert Bartz, Todd. He is a really good instructor. He does a great job. So first of all, Diego asks, is this tool used for production environments also? Well, it's a Linux distribution, Diego. The biggest problem with production environments is probably that it's not your typical open source distribution, which has a larger community of support. I don't know all the details about who's behind it and who helps the individual who builds it, but it appears that it's a one-person show for the most part. So what I would do is if you're thinking about using it in a production environment, certainly I wouldn't use it in a large-scale environment, but maybe in a small business or something, I would talk to the person that manages it and ask, is the code available? Can I get full access to everything in case I need to change some things? And as long as he's willing to give you that and you're comfortable with any modifications you might need to make yourself, it probably wouldn't be bad for a small business. But just because you're not going to have support and there's really not anybody out there even adding an extra layer saying, hey, if you run ZeroShell for $1,500 a year, we'll give you this email-based support or whatever. There's just nothing like that out there for this because it's not as big as some of the other distributions of Linux. So my suggestion is, generally speaking, wouldn't use it for a production environment. Maybe in a small business or something like that where you fine-tuned it. For example, there are a lot of people out there that they just do wireless LANs for small businesses. And they go out and install little wireless networks that are going to support 30, 40 users and maybe have a guest wireless LAN. Well, in that case, if you fine-tune the configuration, you've got it working perfect, you might be comfortable with it and you feel like you can just support it yourself. But if you feel like you're going to need support for it, outside of your organization, it's probably just not good for those larger scale environments for that reason. But it's certainly great for the lab. Okay. Any other questions you might have? I'll give you a minute or two here for any questions you have before we wrap things up today. And while we're waiting on any questions that might come in, let me add that the conference that's coming up next month, I was just looking at that agenda I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation today, and I'm just impressed with the lineup that we have of speakers. And by the way, I'll be the MC. I'll be introducing people, things like that. But I have like a little 15-minute window unless someone has to cancel. Other than that, I'm not doing a lot of presenting. So I'm not talking about myself necessarily when I talk about these great presenters, but we're going to have some people that really know very specialty areas of Wi-Fi, and they're going to be talking to you about it and lessons learned from it. So you'll get some good information there. Okay, have I used ZeroShell on dedicated hardware rather than a VM? If so, which hardware have you tested on? You know, I have used it on a Lenovo laptop, and it did detect the network adapter in there, and everything worked fine with it. So I didn't have any problems there. And I have used it on an older HP desktop computer. It detected that Ethernet adapter as well, and I didn't have any problems there. I have only used it as far as Wi-Fi with a couple of 802.11n adapters, which are pretty universally supported in these Linux distributions these days. And one of them was the older Proxim adapter, and the other one was the Hawking HD45U 3x3 adapter. So I've used both of those, and it detected them fine and seemed to work okay. So I think that answers the chipsets question as well. But I haven't really had any hardware limitations there. Will the conference go back and forth between East Coast and West, or are you going to stick with West Coast conferences from here on out? Keith, that's a good question. And, you know, the answer to that is we're going to see. So, you know, it's going to be about interest and who wants to come. There's a possibility of a West Coast and an East Coast if there's enough demand for it. So it's really just about trying to meet the needs of our users and helping them to get the information they need, not just to prepare for our certifications, but for continuous learning, even when they're already certified with us, to make sure that they stay up on the knowledge. It helps particularly CWNEs as well, because CWNEs are required to get continuing education units, and they can get some by attending this conference too. So that's something we're still looking at. We're even looking at possible conferences in other parts of the world. So definitely keep your eye peeled. We'll probably be getting some notices out first part of next year about those kinds of things. All right, I'll pass that on, Keith. Have I had any issues with particular chipsets? I answered that one. Any limitations with how many wireless NIC or virtual NICs it can support? You know, I'm not sure what the limitation might be. I've never used more than 3 Ethernet ports and 1 wireless NIC at the same time. So that's all I've used, and that worked. So, you know, I'm not sure if there are other limitations, Jason, than that. You might look through the frequently asked questions or the documentation out at the website to find out. But I haven't had any problems with 3 Ethernet and 1 wireless at the same time. That worked fine for me. Okay. Any other questions that you might have? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and just say thank you very much for coming, and the recording of this will be made available online at our CWNP TV YouTube channel. So you'll be able to put it on, view it online there, review it, get any extra information you might have missed while trying to take notes or something like that. And so thank you very much for coming. I'll go ahead and answer this other question, and then we'll wrap up the webinar today. So Diego asks, while using ZeroShell as an access point, it still can be used to route networks like a domestic wireless router. That's exactly right. And that's actually what's kind of cool. You could actually, with one machine, have it be an access point and a router, and it's managing kind of all of that in the background. Though normally the way I would set it up is I'd have a separate virtual machine to be my AP, so I can actually capture network traffic and see that network traffic being communicated. So that's the way I would do it. Okay?